With recent contracts being doled out for millions and millions of dollars for quarterbacks and receivers, Geno Smith and DK Metcalf could have a chance to earn some big paydays this upcoming season. How much pressure is on him to perform this year? We're going to be breaking it all down here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on our Wednesday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in, whether you're listening from Spanaway, Washington, or Jefferson City, Missouri. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. As we draw closer to training camp, we've got our preview series continuing today. We're going to be looking at the receiver spot, outside receivers, as well as slot receivers, and we'll continue our 90-man countdown. This episode brought your way by Game Time. Download a Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The Seahawks are entering the 2024 season with a lot of expectations, particularly on the offensive side of the football, and for good reason. Geno Smith coming back as a third-year starter, a bunch of stud receivers, really good running backs. Of course, there's questions about the offensive line, but looking big picture, Rob, the Seahawks with Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, somehow their contracts have turned into relative bargains when you see what quarterbacks and receivers are getting paid around the league. And with both those players entering the last year of their contract next year, there's going to be plenty of questions about whether or not the Seahawks are going to be able to afford or going to be willing to pay them contracts in their next for their next contract. Are they going to be willing to pay up the money to do it? And so this year, there's a lot of pressure potentially, not just on these two players, but there might be some angst for the franchise too if these two players go out and play really well about what they're going to do in the future with these two players.
Yeah, that's what's going to make this a fascinating conversation, Corbin. And I'm going to actually start at the wide receiver position with DK Metcalf and really try to just compare apples to apples here between DK Metcalf and a couple of other superstar wide receivers. We have seen guys like T. Higgins for the Cincinnati Bengals, Brandon Ayuk, the San Francisco 49ers, and CD Lamb, the Dallas Cowboys, have all been kind of embroiled in some pretty ugly contract squabbles. And of course, the Seahawks don't want to have that same kind of conversation with DK Metcalf, who, of course, is under contract. He, as you said, is entering the final year of a 3-year, $72 million deal. Now, when you hear 3 years, $72 million, and you can do the math on that, that's averaging roughly $25 million a year. And it sounds crazy. But then you go to what Justin Jefferson has done. And Justin Jefferson, in my opinion, is the best wide receiver in the NFL. I mean, no disrespect to any of the other players that I just mentioned, including DK Metcalf. But Justin Jefferson, Corbin, as you well know, signed a deal with 4 years, $140 million. I mean, just astronomical numbers that completely blows away the contract that DK Metcalf signed just a couple of seasons ago. So that really is the conversation that we're having here. Is DK Metcalf at his absolute best? Is he somebody who is going to lead the NFL in receptions the way that CD Lamb did a year ago? Is he going to lead the league in touchdowns or receiving yards the way that Justin Jefferson has at times during his brilliant career so far? That really is the conversation. It's why the Seahawks, I think, want to reward a young man who, of course, came in as the number 64 overall player amid all kinds of questions about, is he ever going to be an NFL superstar? He is a superstar, but is he the best at the position? Or is he somebody that the Seahawks are going to have to pay just because he's the next in line? And so that, to me, is going to be fascinating. And I think that it's helpful that you're talking about an offense that Ryan Grubb is going to be employing here that definitely featured one wide receiver in Rome Odunze a year ago at the University of Washington, but also showed the ability to very much pad the statistics of other receivers. So I don't think that we are going to see DK Metcalf explode for unbelievable numbers and pressure Seattle or anybody else to give him that type of a deal. But I do think that we could see him yet again be in position to lead the Seahawks in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. And then if you're going to make the argument that, hey, he may not be the best receiver in the NFL, but he's the best receiver that you have, then maybe DK Metcalf is going to be arguing for an annual salary north of $30 million.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that he's going to be potentially making that kind of money, but that's the way that the receiver position, quarterback position, and even pass rushers, it just seems like, as you said, it's waiting in line. Well, it's my turn now. Pay me big bucks. And teams are kind of put into a position where they either have to do that or they have to make the really difficult decision to move on from a really good player. We saw the Chiefs do that with Tyreek Hill when they sent him to the Miami Dolphins. And there's been a few other examples of that as well, where teams are not spending the big bucks all the time on receivers, but most of the time, I mean, this is a passing league now in the NFL. You're going to pay for your standout receivers. But you mentioned DK Metcalf being the best receiver on Seattle's roster. In 2 years, I don't know if that's going to be the case. That's the interesting thing here. Jackson Smith and Jigbo, we got to see what he does this year going into year 2. But you and I have talked about this on the show, his potential in this offense, what he's capable of doing, putting up big numbers out of the slot, his explosive ability downfield, winning in the intermediates. There's the potential that he could become Seattle's most dominant threat in the next couple of years, potentially, just because he is a volume pass catcher. And so that might create a little bit more of an issue with the negotiating table. But Seattle has been willing to pay multiple receivers big bucks. They're currently doing it with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, who his contract is going to be up after next year as well. And there's questions about his future potentially in Seattle. But Seattle's going to have some decisions to make there. If Metcalf goes out and has a monster season, John Schneider has shown he's willing to pay a receiver. Is he going to be willing to pay north of $30 million per year, though? That remains to be seen. Now go to the quarterback position. This is a different dynamic, Rob, in the sense Geno Smith's going to turn 34 years old this year. He is not one of the younger quarterbacks in the NFL, and yet he still doesn't have near as much tread on his tires from all those years that he was a backup with multiple teams. And he's making roughly $25 million per year, which that might seem like a ton of money, but right now he is 15th in the NFL in average salary per year for quarterbacks after Trevor Lawrence just signed a monster deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Rob, I want to get your opinion on this because Lawrence was the number 1 pick for Jacksonville just a few years ago. But you look at the stats the last 2 years, and almost across the board, Geno Smith has better numbers than Trevor Lawrence. Now, obviously, he's a much younger player who the Jaguars think is still not close to reaching his peak. And yet it really tells you the state of the quarterback market where everybody seems to be getting paid if you are a quality starter.
Yeah, there's no question about it. It really does come down to youth, upside, and just the fact that Jacksonville Jaguars have struggled as much as they have. I think that the idea of essentially cutting Trevor Lawrence loose at this point, given all that you've already invested, it would seem like just a huge waste of time and a colossal flub at number 1 overall. So the fact that Trevor Lawrence signed this deal that at its maximum is 5 years, $275 million. My goodness, we're talking about monopoly money at this point. It really does show that the Seahawks giving Geno Smith, who earned this money, 3-year deal worth $75 million at this point. I mean, that's essentially peanuts, and so when you look at the statistics of the two players, clearly Geno Smith, and those of you who are not able to watch on YouTube, then I'll just kind of run through some of the numbers that are very much in favor of Geno Smith almost across the board. In touchdowns, Geno Smith has 50 compared to Trevor Lawrence's 46. Interceptions, he has less, 20 interceptions compared to Trevor Lawrence. This is over the last couple of seasons, of course. Geno Smith has a better completion rate, 67.4% compared to 65.9%. A better passer rating, not quite as many rushing yards, but it's similar, 521 yards for Geno Smith, 630 for Trevor Lawrence. And one of the interesting analytics that Pro Football Focus provides is the idea of big time throws or BTTs. And even in that, Geno Smith has basically more than Trevor Lawrence, 66 to 63. And I think anybody who has watched a lot of tape of the Seahawks and the Jaguars knows that Geno Smith has often led the Seahawks to victories because he has made big time throws at critical moments. That has not always been the case with Trevor Lawrence. And so, again, I think that if you just are looking at the statistics, then Geno Smith deserves a deal somewhat similar to Trevor Lawrence. But you mentioned the biggest factor, and that's the age. Trevor Lawrence is going to be 25, and Geno Smith is going to be 34 this season. That's the biggest reason why. And I think that you can make an argument that at times Trevor Lawrence has been basically hamstrung by the offense in Jacksonville, the play calling, the talent around him, all of those things. Geno Smith, in some people's opinion, has been boosted by the play calling in the situation. That's what makes this season absolutely critical for the Seahawks, and specifically Geno Smith and DK Metcalf. If their statistics do blow up, if the Seahawks do return to the playoffs, then I think that you're going to see Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, number 7 and number 14, respectively, basically see their contracts essentially get doubled the same way when the season ends.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those double-edged swords. You're excited if you get big numbers because that means the Seahawks are going back to the playoffs most likely. Maybe they win a game or two in the postseason. But on the flip side, now we have to pay you the money that you have earned. And it's complicated with Geno Smith. The Seahawks have given themselves a little bit of flexibility here. They've got Sam Howell now waiting in the wings, who they acquired in March. So they do have a little more flexibility there. At the same time, if Geno Smith goes out and throws 35, 40 touchdowns in Ryan Grubb's offense, you got to pay him. You know, their quarterbacks can play at a really high level, deep into their 30s, even early 40s. And again, he doesn't have as much tread on his tires at this age. So this is a critical season for both him and DK Metcalf from a contract standpoint and for their futures with the Seattle Seahawks. There's no question about it. When we come back, we're going to continue talking receivers in our training camp preview. A lot of players to break down, both in the outside and in the slot as we head towards the 2024 season. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Seahawks podcast. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy, and is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay's Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Wednesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We're closing in on the start of the 2024 season, training camp opening for the Seahawks. The first open practice on July 24th, a little earlier than usual this year, but that's good news. That means football is coming a little faster for fans. And we're going to continue our preview here with maybe the deepest, most talented position group on Seattle's roster. Maybe you can debate defensive line and cornerback as well, but the receiver position, you've got your top 3 wideouts, actually your top 4 coming back, with Jake Bobo also returning. Last year had 19 catches, a couple of touchdown receptions. And Rob, when you look on the outside, Tyler Lockett has done a lot of damage in his career from the slot. But at this point, with Jackson Smith and Jigba now being the primary slot receiver, when we're looking at the outside receivers, your X's and your Z's, it's clearly DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett atop the depth chart. And you've also got Jake Bobo there as well, looking to build on that really surprising rookie year.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that really this feels like a 4-man. The 4 guys are basically locked in. We know that DK Metcalf and JSN, Tyler Lockett, and Jake Bobo, there is some conversations among some out there that Jake Bobo was not a lock for this roster. Based on everything I've seen and heard throughout the OTA process, he certainly looks like a lock to me. As we've talked about, both of us at different points, Bobo has probably the best hands of anybody on this roster. And so I think that his ability as a possession receiver just makes him that much more valuable than maybe his statistics would suggest. So really the conversation starts to kind of dwindle on past that. Laviska Shenault, for example, we talked just yesterday about Derek Young. Does Eskridge, is he able to provide enough as a receiver that is going to be able to help him in terms of making this club as the primary return man? And so to me, those are the interesting conversations here. I think to start the conversation, though, again, we got to go back to the outside and kind of work our way in. DK Metcalf, as we talked about just a moment ago, was an absolute superstar. Can he take his game to a whole other level and be able and enforce the Seahawks essentially to have to go cheap the rest of the wide receiver position? That's going to be a fascinating one to kind of evaluate throughout the season. But we all know what DK Metcalf is in terms of his size, in terms of his speed. He does have some route limitations to him because he's a big man and he doesn't change directions quite as well as, say, a JSN. And that's why Jackson Smith-Njigba is so dynamic out of the slot, is because, again, it's the same change of direction that we saw in his lightning fast 3-cone and short shuttle times back at the Combine a couple of years ago. And he has a strong hands, very similar to Jake Bobo in that regard. And then Tyler Lockett, of course, is the elusive master that he is. I mean, his quickness, his savviness, his hands, his courage, and his awareness of defenders around him. I mean, there is a reason why the man does not miss football games despite having the slight frame that he possesses. So again, all four of those players, it feels like they have very specific roles within Seattle's offense, or at least the offense that we've seen in the past. To me, the conversation really does come back down to Laviska Shenault and Derek Young, their size outside, and then as well as the slot receivers with return ability. So D. Eskridge, Aesop Winston, and D. Williams. What can they provide in the return game? Because at this point, Corbin, I feel like the Seahawks are going to be stretched with maybe 6 wide receivers, ultimately making the top 53. That's been on average what Seattle has done in the past several years. But of course, it's going to be interesting to see how the Seahawks configure their roster a little bit differently now that it's Mike McDonald calling the shots rather than Pete Carroll.
Yeah, it really boils down to me, the slot position, because I'm with you. I mentioned this the other day. I think Jake Bobo, what he did last year, what we've seen in the practice field. And again, I got the argument, hey, he needs to impress a whole new coaching staff. I mean, everybody in this roster had to do that. But Bobo had a fantastic mini camp. He looked great in OTAs. The soft hands, the run blocking ability. I mean, he does a lot of things that don't show up in the box score. And Brian Grubb is going to love all those qualities. He wants to run the football. He wants receivers that are willing to block. And Bobo's route running, his soft hands, I think he's pretty much a lock to be on this team. And so it really boils down to me, the 3 players that are battling for 2 spots. It's Derek Young, Laviska Shenault, and D. Eskridge. One of those players is going to be an odd man out. It's special teams is going to play a huge role in that. And the fact that Derek Young mostly played on the outside, some would say that's working against him. And I could see that argument. But if he's able to play on special teams, as we talked about yesterday, if he's able to do on special teams what he did in his rookie season, go down and down punts inside the 5-yard line, make tackles on kickoffs, and he can give you a few contributions on offense with his size and athleticism. He's a player you can make some arguments for making this team. Shenault has got more of a track record catching passes in the NFL. He's also ran the football a fair amount. So he gives you that true gadget player on offense. He can return kicks. And D. Eskridge is really, it's weird saying this for a former 2nd-round pick, but he is really the wild card here. Can he stay healthy? Can he avoid suspensions, the things that have kept him off the field and prevented him from being productive at all? Is he going to be able to take advantage of this last opportunity where he can show off that 4.3 speed on kick returns and on offense? And there's a reason the Seahawks brought him back. This new coaching staff, they wanted to have an extended look at D. Eskridge. So he is down to that last strike. Can he avoid striking out and work his way back and maybe get a single or a double here for the Seahawks and emerge as a quality, complementary target in the receiving game while also giving them some punch on special teams? That's going to be the key to getting a ticket to the 53-man roster this year.
Yeah, no question about it. And you mentioned singles and doubles with D. Eskridge. I think home runs is the reason why. Another wide receiver, it's not on that list, but the Seattle brought in during the OTAs, and I think would make some sense for this roster. And that is Robbie Chosen, previously known as Robbie Anderson, has played in the NFL for a long time. And as you were talking about D. Eskridge, you mentioned, just the idea of, his straight line speed, big play potential, and then obviously the possibilities of injuries and suspensions that have plagued D. Eskridge's career to this point. That's been some of the same things that have happened with Robbie Chosen, but he does possess that straight line speed that the Seahawks have always prioritized. The Seahawks lack an elite vertical threat. That's why I think that Robbie Chosen can provide this, but even at his extended age, he can absolutely fly, and he tracks the ball very well over his shoulder. And Geno Smith, like Russell Wilson before him, is an excellent deep ball passer, and that should improve even more so with an offense that is expected to feature an awful lot of play action passing. At least it certainly did at the University of Washington with Ryan Grubb. So Robbie Chosen is very much a player that we haven't talked about much, that I think is among the wide receivers that might be able to kind of surprise some people a little bit, and bears watching.
And I think it's worth noting that Chosen has not signed with the Seahawks to this point. He was a tryout player at minicamp. They haven't signed him, but with a flurry of roster moves that they made on Monday, they have 2 openings on the roster right now. So maybe they're planning to bring him in before training camp. That remains to be seen. Maybe add a linebacker. There's a lot of different things they could do with those 2 open spots right now on the 90-man roster. When we come back, we're going to continue our 90-man countdown. We've got numbers 55 through 53. Don't go away. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It's time to continue our 90-man countdown. And Rob, we are almost to the 53-man mark. In fact, we're going to hit that today. Numbers 55 through 53. And we're going to have a little bit of versatility here with a number of different position groups. And going to start at tight end. Brady Russell, who actually was not signed originally by the Seattle Seahawks last year as an undrafted rookie out of Colorado. He was with the Philadelphia Eagles, was cut at the end of training camp, signed to their practice squad, and then Seattle early in the season signed him off Philadelphia's practice squad. He ended up playing in double-digit games as a special teams player. Didn't see much action on offense, but he is one of the players to watch here in a tight end group that is new look. You got AJ Barner, Jack Westover coming into the fold, Pharaoh Brown, and Brady Russell is going to be hoping his special teams value can carry him to a roster spot.
And very well might. You can make the argument that Brady Russell was Seattle's best special teams defender a year ago. He was among the club's leading tacklers, had 7 tackles without a missed tackle, at least according to Pro Football Focus. Just yesterday, of course, we were talking about the wide receiver in Derek Young, who only had 1 tackle and 3 missed tackles on special teams coverage a year ago. So again, Brady Russell, 6'3", 245 pounds, a former walk-on at Colorado, which maybe is having some success now recently with Coach Prime, but certainly wasn't having much success during the Brady Russell time there. But is a good football player. He's instinctive. He's kind of got a Nick Bellore type of a vibe to him in that he has the intangibles in terms of the locker room, in terms of his work ethic, his positional versatility. He's primarily played tight end, but also H-back. And again, he's a core 4 special teamer. Every special teams unit, you see Brady Russell out there, that long hair flying, and he just kind of plays like a classic special teamer. And I think that that's important. So again, I understand that when you start talking about the Seahawks, the tight end position, we're going to be focusing on guys like Noah Fant, of course, Pharaoh Brown, Jack Westover even, but Brady Russell is very much somebody that, again, Seahawks fans should be paying an awful lot of attention to. He's the kind of guy the coaches are going to love more than the scouts. And similar to what we saw in the past, the coaches' perspective has an awful lot to do with the final decisions that are made when it comes to roster cut down day.
Yeah, I think the big advantage that he's got, we keep mentioning special teams. Tyler Mabry can play some special teams, but he is not a core four special teamer. And again, what you mean by that, playing on all the major special teams units. Brady Russell can do that and then some. He can play at a high level in every single facet of special teams. And every team needs a couple guys on their roster that can do that. Otherwise, you're going to struggle on special teams. So that could be the edge that Russell needs. If he can show some pass catching ability and block fairly decent in preseason games, just surprise a little bit on offense. The Seahawks already know what he can do on special teams. That could be the ticket for him to make this roster. If he just shows a little bit on offense, especially with all the new pieces the Seahawks have at that position, he might be a better fit for Ryan Grubb's offense than what he was for Shane Waldron's system, being more of a move tight end as well. So we'll have to see where he fits in, but certainly a player to keep a close eye on that could get back on the 53-man roster. Now let's go to one of Seattle's incoming rookies, one of their two Auburn corners that they selected in this draft, DJ James. He started his college career at Oregon, so he's familiar with the Pacific Northwest. Played 3 seasons for the Ducks, then transferred back to his home state. He's actually from Auburn, so he ended up going back to his hometown school. Had 2 really successful seasons with the Auburn Tigers, mostly playing on the outside. And it's interesting, Rob, now that he's coming to Seattle, he had less than 30 career snaps in the slot at Oregon and Auburn. He very rarely played there, but that's where the Seahawks are expected to play him as a rookie. He's going to play in the slot. That's where we saw him at OTAs and mandatory minicamp. He had a couple of pass breakups. He had an interception in the mandatory minicamp. So he's off to a really quick start. That is the pathway for him to make this football team, because behind Devin Witherspoon, there may be some questions about having that second slot defender. DJ James can also play special teams at a high level, and that's another way that he could make this football team.
Yeah, he's got some return ability, and he has a kind of a knack for finding the football. At least that has been one of his strengths in the past. 18 passes broken up over the last couple of seasons, leading Auburn each of the past 2 years. Only 3 interceptions during that time, and so that's one of the things that I wanted to see some improvement. And that is one of the things that, as you mentioned, he had an interception during the OTA practices, so that is definitely encouraging. He was a guy that I personally gave a 4th round grade to, and was, I shouldn't say surprised to see that he fall to the 6th round, because let's be real, he's 5'11", 175 pounds. He also is the cornerback that was victimized when Alabama came back with a stunning touchdown in the final 32 seconds. It was 4th and 31, 4th and goal from the 31-yard line, when the Alabama quarterback Jalen Monroe hit Isaiah Bond in the back, the left corner of the end zone for the stunning Iron Bowl victory. DJ James was in good position, but was beat. And there isn't a scout worth his salt in the NFL that is going to want to show the NFL, show his general manager, or their general manager, I should say, or owner, that, hey, this is the player that I am pounding the table we should get at this point. I mean, even though he's falling on draft day, it's very difficult to want to select a player that in the biggest moments, at least the highlights that you're going to be looking up on YouTube, if you're looking at DJ James, that is the one that's going to pop up. But my goodness, it was one play. And again, he was in good position. Sometimes the offense just makes the big play here. DJ James is a quality player, and I love his quickness inside at the nickel position. As you said, Corbin, he didn't play that position very well, but he has electric acceleration. He changes direction well. He ran a 4.42 in the 40-yard dash, which is flying. But his 1.50 split was among the 5 fastest of any cornerbacks tested this year. It was faster than any of the 3 cornerbacks that went in the first round this year. So again, we're talking about an elite athlete who does have the awareness, the quickness that I think that you have to prioritize in today's nickel position. Is he as physical as Devin Witherspoon? No, of course not, even though they have similar size. It doesn't feel like there's anybody in the league that packs the punch pound for pound that Devin Witherspoon provides. But he does have the coverage abilities that you're looking for at the nickel cornerback spot. If he can get a few more interceptions and show a little bit more consistency in terms of run support, then I think the Seahawks actually found themselves quite the steal in the 6th round this year.
And I think he's another reason that Kobe Bryant is exclusively playing safety at this point, because the Seahawks really want to see what they have at DJ James in the slot. Now let's wrap things up here. Our last player, let's get back to the trenches on defense. And Cameron Young is a player that I actually thought was a pleasant surprise for most of his rookie year. We're talking about a fourth-round pick who had very minimal pass rushing production at Mississippi State. He was not known for that. And yet he was able to generate a few pressures and a quarterback hit last year in limited snaps as a nose tackle. He's not your prototypical 335, 340 plus pound nose tackle. He's 320 pounds, which is still good size, but he played pretty well down the stretch for the Seahawks. The big question here is, where is he at from a health perspective? He did not participate in OTAs or minicamp. You brought in Jonathan Hankins, an established veteran who has started a ton of games in the NFL. He has played for Adam Durde, the new defensive coordinator at Dallas. It had 3 sacks for him last year. Hankins has been working with the first team throughout OTAs and minicamp. We got to wonder where Cameron Young fits in. And this is another case. Hey, this new coaching staff, they don't have any allegiance to Cameron Young. They were not the staff in place when he was drafted. And Mike Macdonald has typically preferred those bigger, more traditional bodied nose tackles. And so I think Cameron Young has a good chance to be on this football team, but he's got to be healthy first and foremost. And I wouldn't say that it is a guarantee that he makes this roster just because the body types and the skill set that Mike Macdonald and his staff are going to be looking for is quite a bit different in some regards than what Pete Carroll and his staff were looking for over the years on that defensive line.
Yeah, I think that's well said. With Cameron Young, I mean, he is listed at Mississippi State. He was listed at 6'3", 305 pounds. And as you said, he's bulked up to 6'3", 320. He is a bigger man than that size suggests. I mean, there's a lot of folks out there, they hear 6'3", 305, and they think that's massive. But, in relative perspective, if you look at all these different body types, Cameron Young is actually bigger than his size suggests. He is just so broad across the shoulders, really thick in his lower half, and that provides some power at the point of attack. But the Seahawks, it feels like, have a bunch of guys that are built like that. You mentioned Jonathan Hankins, the veteran added in, and certainly Matt Gotel, and he's the biggest guy on Seattle's roster, and so he certainly can eat up blocks, so to speak, in the middle as well. So where does Cameron Young fit? And the fact that he was not on the field during mini camps and OTAs, Mike Macdonald addressed it during the only OTA practice that I was able to attend, and characterized it as a lower body injury, and that the Seahawks may not see Cameron Young back on the field until training camp. We know with Pete Carroll, there was always reason for optimism. There were some certain words like legit that when you would hear those things, you knew, okay, this was going to be an injury that might keep a player out or something of that nature. We don't necessarily, at least I don't, have the familiarity yet with Mike Macdonald to kind of parse his words and figure out how serious of an injury situation this might be for Cameron Young. But experience tells me that big guys, when they're off their feet, tend to get even bigger. And so is Cameron Young going to be able to come in to training camp knowing the playbook in football shape? Those are some of the question marks because, again, he does have a little bit of an uphill climb that to make this roster outright. And I think that was basically viewed as a given, considering where he was drafted by the Seahawks a year ago. But as you said, this coaching staff has no allegiance to him, and there's an awful lot of big bodies that can basically suitably play his role. He did have 18 tackles in 16 games a year ago, Corbin, but he didn't have a sack. He only had 1 tackle for loss. The production's going to have to be better. Otherwise, I think the Seahawks may go with a different, healthier, bigger option, say somebody like a Matt Gotel.
And I could even see Miles Adams getting the roster spot over him. I know Miles Adams is not a prototypical nose. He's around 300 pounds, but he actually has played the nose tackle position pretty well when he's had his opportunities, and he's short and compact. He plays with really good leverage, and he can move up and down the line. That is going to be valued by Mike Macdonald and his staff. So Cameron Young, you got to get back healthy. They got to get him slowly worked back into football shape, and then you got to start performing because you're going to have other players vying for that roster spot. It is not a given that he's on this 53. If I had to predict today, I think he makes it, but it is going to be a close call. He could be one of those guys that's only a little bit on the right side of the bubble as we head into training camp for the start of the 2024 season. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back for tomorrow's show, going to continue our training camp preview. That's going to swing back over to the defensive side of the football with inside linebackers, a position with plenty of question marks heading towards training camp. Make sure that you're listening in, and thanks for tuning into this show Go Hawks.